Well, here it is. We've been waiting for this document for years. The Scottish Government's been promising new guidance on sex education for years, but it seems like they've been a bit reluctant to produce it. Maybe it's become a bit of a hot topic for them, perhaps through the work of the Scottish Family Party primarily, and others as well. But they were last published their guidance on the delivery of relationship, sexual health and parenthood education in Scottish schools. This is just a draft. It's there for consultation, but let's have a look what it's got to say. Well, most of what it's got to say is really saying nothing. It's just waffle, well-being, equality, cut and paste drivel. I mean, they're concerned about the environment. I mean, they could have cut down the size of this document to a fifth and still said just as much in it. So a lot of it is just contentless waffle. But I'm going to look at a few bits that are quite interesting, and there are some interesting changes to note here. So here we go. It says local authorities must have regard to this guidance. So all local authority schools. So there's no like Western Isles opting out of this or anything like that. This is for all state schools. It will apply to independent schools as well through the back door, because independent schools are inspected by the same inspectors, and the inspectors will expect the same standards. But in any case, it seems like almost all independent schools in Scotland are falling over themselves to toe the government's line in terms of ideology in any case. Right, what have we got here? It says parents and carers have the right to have their child educated in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. That's from the United Nations Convention on Human Rights. So yes, that is absolutely true. This is why RSHP education should be presented in an objective, balanced and sensitive manner within a framework of sound values. Now you may read that and think, oh thank goodness, they've seen the light. This is a total transformation of government policy, because previously the sex education resources were anything but objective. They were presenting very much a subjective philosophy. They were very unbalanced, they were very insensitive, and they most definitely did not have a set of sound values at the heart of them. So you may be thinking at last, the government's seen the light and they're now going to make these changes, but the government's saying it as though we're going to carry on what we're doing. So that's probably quite scary. The government thinks their existing sex education is objective, balanced, sensitive, and within a framework of sound values. But that seems to be what they think. I mean, it's full of talk about children's rights. Because whenever you see children's rights, think to yourself, empowering the state, disempowering parents. And there's plenty of rights talk in here. It talks about the right to life, survival and development, apart from before birth, obviously. It talks about the right to express a view and have your view taken into account. The right to express a view, well, that's a bit dubious in a lot of Scottish schools, isn't it? A lot of Scottish pupils say that they're afraid to express their viewpoints in class. We'll come to that a little bit more later. Right to have your view taken into account. What's the difference between having your view taken into account and people doing what you want? Well, that's what I mean by empowering children. So children should get what they want, not at the expense of the state, normally at the expense of their parents. Now it talks about these resources being necessary to protect children from online influences. Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds great. Children certainly do need protecting from online influences. But one of the online influences they need protecting from is this constant promotion that changing gender is normal, natural, healthy. Look how exciting and glamorous it is. That's a very dangerous online influence. But the Scottish Government's policies don't counter that influence, they reinforce it. So what's on paper sounds good, but what they mean by it in practice is anything but. Right, so engagement and learning, what have we got here? We've got parents and carers should be given an advanced opportunity to view key teaching materials and ask questions about any aspect of the RSHP education programme. And that does happen. Some schools do say, you can come in at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday evening if you want to, and we can talk about the resources. Often when they have these meetings, they don't actually show the resources, or if they do show some of them, they don't show the most controversial parts of them. If they describe them, they don't describe the most controversial parts of them. But they are saying this is supposed to happen, but I suspect they're also thinking it shouldn't really happen very thoroughly either. But anyway, it says evidence indicates where this has happened, parents and carers feel more confident about speaking to their children at home and answering their questions, for example, on sexual health, relationships and physical development. So the parents are overjoyed with this. What do you think the evidence is? The evidence is head teachers probably reporting back saying, yeah, there were some parents who said it was helpful, probably just been polite when they've come to the thing. So I don't regard that as evidence in any credible sense. I've heard of these meetings where parents go along, express concerns, and the school just dismisses them. In some cases, it becomes quite annoyed with them. In one case, even made an accusation that one of the parents had been intimidating towards them just because he was saying, I don't agree with this. Right, moving on. Withdrawal from RSHP education. A lot of people ask about this. Can you withdraw your child from it? Well, let's listen to what the government's got to say. Having given parents and carers the opportunity to view the key teaching materials, they can decide to withdraw their children from participation in the sexual health elements of RSHP education. The option should be made known to parents and carers and their views respected. Respected. What does it mean to have your view respected? So if a parent says, I don't want my child in these lessons, that view should be respected. Does that mean you actually do what they want? No, it doesn't. It means that you treat the view with respect. You might not do what they want, but you're respectful about it. You're respectful of their point of view. It says you can withdraw them from the sexual health elements. Sexual health, right? All the sexuality and transgender elements. It seems to be suggesting, no, you can't withdraw from those. They are compulsory, which we knew already. The option of withdrawal should be balanced with the child's right to education. So as far as they're concerned, children have got a right to be corrupted by sex education in schools. That's a right. So if parents want to withdraw them from that, they are potentially infringing one of the children's rights. Remember what I was saying about rights. Rights always involve empowering the state, disempowering parents. And that is exactly what we've got going on here. But let's carry on this about withdrawing children. Any potential negative impact on the curricular progression of the child or young person or their right to an education should be conveyed to parents and carers. In other words, if you say, I don't want my son or daughter teaching this corrupting filth, they'll think they're not going through the curriculum properly. They're not learning what they need to learn. Therefore, their right to an education is not being fulfilled. And whose fault is it? The right to an education is not being fulfilled. It's your fault, mum. It's your fault. So we might have to overrule you. Now, I've heard of lots of cases where parents have been overruled, where they've tried to withdraw children from sex education. Right, next in the document, there's a big page with a huge flowchart about withdrawing children from it. Now, it's interesting this gets so much attention. It's obvious why, because they realise so many people, so many parents wanting to withdraw their children from it. So they're having to take this issue a bit more seriously and have a think about it. So it goes through a flow chart of show them the resources, try and persuade them it's okay and all that sort of thing. It says in a meeting you should cover what alternative learning is going to replace the sex education. And that's a bit unfair. It almost sounds like they're saying to the parents, okay, so if you don't want them to do this, what do you want them to do? It's a bit unfair. Because I think going and sit in the library and browse, well, who knows what books are in the library. Anyway, go and sit in the library with a good book or two to read should be a perfectly acceptable alternative. Now it talks here about ensuring that children's learning remains on a par with their peers. So if you're withdrawing someone from sex education, this says the school's going to make sure their learning remains on a par with their peers. What exactly does that mean? So if your children are not learning what you regard as bad messages, miseducation, the school's got to ensure that they're learning the same thing as their peers regardless. I heard one case, which I was outraged by, was where parents withdrew a child from sex education. I can't remember how old she was. I think she was maybe, was it 8 or 13? I can't remember. Anyway, so this girl was withdrawn. Then the teacher said to the girl, okay, your mum and dad have said they don't want you to go to those lessons. That's fine. Would you like me to teach you the same things one-to-one instead? I mean, this sounds like that's suggesting the same sort of idea. Right, when the child's withdrawn, it says review withdrawal at appropriate points throughout the year. So you send a letter at the start of the year saying you want them withdrawing, but you'd think that would be it, at least for a year, if not for the rest of their school career. But oh no. It's going to be reviewed at appropriate points every term, every few weeks. Will the parents be involved at every review point? Or will the next review point just be, right, so do you want to come to lessons now or not? You do? Oh, okay, right, well, we'll just come along from now on then. We won't bother talking about this with mum and dad. ensure balance of the best interests and rights of the parents and carers and of the child, young person remain at the heart of decision making. So that is the opposite of saying the parents decide. If the parents want to withdraw them, then they're withdrawn. They're not saying that at all. They're trying to say it in fairly vague, benign and innocuous terms, but you can see exactly what they mean, and it's a continuation of what's already happening. Right, embedding RSHP education. It talks again about this framework of sound values, which as far as I'm concerned involves traditional teaching about marriage. It involves a message about LGBT relationships, pointing out some of the pitfalls there and some of the dangers and negative outcomes associated with them. Transgenderism is a dangerous philosophy, full stop. I mean, pornography is just a negative, harmful and immoral activity. I mean, that's my idea of sound values. So when you read the government wants us basing on sound values, they think what they're already doing are sound values. So it sounds reassuring, but no, not at all. Right, next section, consent. Lots to talk about consent, too much. And I think the problem with it is it gives the message that consent's all that matters when it comes to sex. If the two people consent, then that's fine. But I say, no, it's not. It's not fine. If one of them's married, for example, and this is an adulterous affair, consent, I don't care if you've consented or not, sex is wrong. Or for various other reasons as well. But the children, and I emphasize children and young people, are told that consent's a really, really important thing. Consent, consent, consent. If two people consent to having sex, that's what makes it okay. As long as they've consented, that's fine. Wrong message. It says older children, by which they mean 8 to 12-year-olds, and young people benefit from regular and relevant discussion of the laws, particularly in relation to unwanted sexual behaviours, such as the increasing prevalence and sharing of intimate images, as well as the importance of consent. So teaching 8 to 12-year-olds the importance of sexual consent. Wrong message. The message to 8 to 12-year-olds is, you do not have sex. You do not do that. It's a crime. If anyone tries to do this involving you, then they're trying to commit a crime. Report it immediately and run off in the opposite direction. But instead the message is, well, you know, are both people happy? Do people consent? That's what you really need to know. You know, 8 and 9-year-olds. No, it's not. It talks about the National Guidance for Underage Sexual Activity. That's the government document that effectively makes the age of consent 13 in Scotland, so long as the age gap is not too big. All right, turning over. Children and young people have the same rights to confidentiality as adults, namely personal and private information disclosed during RSHP education should not be shared without consent. Right, I disagree. Children and young people should not have the same right to confidentiality as adults. Absolutely not. Now, of course, people in the children's rights ethos would say, what a terrible thing to say. What a discriminatory thing to say. But why ever do you think parents have some sort of special access to information related to their children? They would say. Well, I disagree. I mean, parents need to know. Parents are primarily responsible. They're the ones who love the children most, careful of them the most. They need to know. They should be informed of what's going on. The Scottish Government thinks the opposite. So what do we hear? So again, still talking about consent. It talks about domestic violence. It talks about that as gender-based violence, which is pretty sexist, really, because domestic violence can take place. Sometimes women are the perpetrators of it. Sometimes it's within gay and lesbian relationships. I mean, apparently there's quite a high incidence of it within those types of relationships. But in this, gender-based violence. All domestic violence is gender-based. It's not the good person, the bad person. It's the man and the woman. I mean, that, you know, as far as they're concerned, that means the bad person and the good person. So it's still in sexism, a sexist approach to these issues. Right, we now get to the most interesting section here. Faith and belief. Knowledge and understanding about the traditions, beliefs and practices of different religions, faiths and belief groups supports children and young people to develop respect and understanding. To facilitate this, themes can be devised so individuals can interact and learn alongside those who have different beliefs or values to them, leading to potentially increased understanding. That sort of sounds good, doesn't it? When we're going to listen at different perspectives, everyone's going to feel included. I think what they really mean is that in the class there's going to be There's going to be a Catholic, there's going to be a Protestant kid, there's going to be an atheist kid, there's going to be a boy with a turban, there's going to be a Muslim sitting over there. It's really diverse, but we're going to teach them the one true truth, the government's ideology, and they're all going to sit there learning it. They've got such a diverse class, it's wonderful. We're all united in learning the one true truth from the government. That's what they're meaning there. Anyway, let's carry on. Schools have a key role to play, providing an educational experience that is inclusive to all, regardless of the beliefs and values they hold. Sounds promising, doesn't it? With inclusive RSP education, children and young people, where religion and or belief plays a role in their identities, should be able to feel included and accepted within their school and community. Plays a role with their identities. It's not identities that are important here, it's their beliefs, it's their values that are the issue. But let's carry on. When children and young people can see themselves represented in what they learn, it helps them to feel like they belong, that their identity is valued. This helps them better engage with education. So in other words, if you're, say, a Sikh boy who's been presented with a message that's totally in contradiction with his religious beliefs, the fact that there's someone presenting this message with a turban on in the video, then that makes it okay. That's what they're meaning. It's all about identity, it's not about values. So not convinced. It talks about chaplains. It says having links with local faith communities is great. It says, but make sure they're really the proper representatives of those communities. How do you tell they're the proper representatives? Well, it probably means they're the ones that agree with the government's philosophy. I've heard of cases where there's school chaplains who hold, for example, a more orthodox Christian viewpoint, and they often find that they're not school chaplains for too long. Right, next thing about religion and belief. Learners can feel excluded from their learning if only one set of values or a theme has dominated learning, while their own beliefs, values and views are excluded. I'm not making this up, this is not a joke. This is what it says. I'm going to read that again. Learners can feel excluded from learning if only one set of values or a theme has dominated learning, while their own beliefs, values and views are excluded. Now they're clearly trying to have their cake and eat it here, because when they produce resources and guidance, it's very definitely banging one message, one philosophy, one ideology mercilessly into these young people and children. And yet they come out with a statement like this, that they're going to, children feel excluded if their own beliefs are not represented. So when a child goes along and says, my belief is homosexual relationships are immoral, is that view going to be represented in the learning? I suggest, of course it isn't. Have they thought this through? I don't think they know what they're talking about. I think what's happened here is they've had a lot of people giving feedback saying they feel alienated, either children themselves, young people themselves, or their parents, saying that pupils feel alienated because their views are not represented in the curriculum. So the government's put a passage in saying, oh yes, we don't want you to feel alienated. We'll try and include your beliefs. But what do they really mean? So for kids there who believes that the whole ideology of transgenderism is dangerous and delusional, is that view going to be represented in the lesson? Is it going to be part of one of the perspectives presented to the class? I can't imagine it. I mean, how would Murray up in Aberdeen, who got expelled basically for saying there were two genders, feel about this? So this is very strange. Anyway, there's more. Of course, next. Practitioners should be open to discussion and incorporation of the various perspectives on relationships found within their community, including those within religious belief and faith groups. That sounds great, doesn't it? Providing opportunities for parents and carers, as well as children and young people, to contribute to discussions and offer perspectives can help support an inclusive learning experience. That sounds fantastic. I mean, it's totally contradicted by everything else in the document, which suggests that the government will continue, hammering its one true truth into each and every child. But they've put this in. Right, next one. Many people consider their beliefs, practices and traditions can be linked to the promotion of mental well-being and a healthy lifestyle. It can be helpful to include those understandings in learning and teaching. Okay, marriage. Okay, sexual abstinence until marriage, for example. That would come under that description for a huge number of young people and families within Scotland. Does that mean that view is going to be included in the curriculum? No, I think the people who wrote this don't know what they're talking about. They're not imagining what it could mean. Right, next bit. Practitioners should be sensitive to the possible range of perspectives around modesty and inclusivity. And modesty. And so again, they're obviously thinking about Muslims. So they're trying to include that. But what about more widely? Are they going to start talking about what's appropriate and inappropriate dress for females, for example? I mean, that will surely be a huge taboo. Feminists will hit the roof as soon as someone suggests that the girls should consider what they're wearing from the point of view of modesty. So again, have they really thought this through, or are they just putting this in because some people have said they want it put in and they don't really know what they're talking about? And the last line, delivery of RSHP learning in a school should retain an emphasis on diversity, inclusivity, and the freedom of expression for all. I mean, it's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, they turn the schools into rainbow theme parks and then say this. So I don't think they understand what they're talking about, but if this stays through into the actual guidance, that will provide very good ammunition for anyone having conversations with a school or local authority or whatever about the content of sex education. You've really got some ammunition here to use. I'm not suggesting it will work, because the rest of it, all the resources provided, the rest of the guidance, as I say, it's all about promoting the government's one true truth. But this is some ammunition you can have ready at your disposal. Right, not too far to go. Gender inclusive education. I'm not sure what this is to do with sex education particularly, but gender stereotyping, the feminist line. So it says this. It says it's widely understood there is no inherent difference between individuals based on their gender alone, which should limit their interests, capabilities, or ambitions. Right, that statement is true, but it doesn't mean what they think it means. I mean, of course, there's no difference between sexes that limits their interests. There are differences between sexes to do with interests, capabilities, and ambitions. They're very distinct differences, but they don't mean that anyone shouldn't be allowed to do anything. Boys, girls, men and women can choose to do whatever they want to. It just happens to be that men and women in some cases are better at different things and prefer to do different things and are interested in different things. Okay, so that's fine. But then listen to what they say. Then they say, however, it's recognized that subject choice and many subsequent work and life choices can be highly gendered. In other words, we've got a problem here. We've got a problem. Because there shouldn't be a rule that says women are not allowed to do certain jobs, for example, because there shouldn't be a rule about that, therefore it's a problem if everything doesn't work out 50-50. It's totally irrational, completely illogical, but as usual in a Scottish government document, they don't seem to realise it. So they're basically saying that their mission is to equalise everything. So if there are more boys than girls choosing physics, something must be done. If there are more girls than boys choosing hairdressing at the further education college, something must be done. But there's nothing new. We already know that that's the way it works. One little concerning thing later on there in the gender inclusive bit. It says that children should be given the opportunity to explore gender through, for example, free play. What does that mean? Play. So we're talking about the very youngest children. How do you explore gender through play? Is that through the dressing up box, possibly? I know Stonewall issued some guidance a few years ago now, suggesting that boys should be encouraged to dress up as girls, basically, as an activity in school, just as part of play, so they can explore their gender. Sounds a bit similar what's in this guidance. There's a big section about intersex conditions that it says affect 0.02% of the population. Now, intersex conditions are a very serious issue, but they're very rare medical problems. Why is it covered in this document? It's covered because transgender ideologues believe that it gives credence to their ideology, and that's why it's in here. It's not here to try and help intersex people. It's here because they think it bolsters the transgender message. Right, LGBT inclusive education. This has been in place for ages, but let's see what it says. So the school's LGBT inclusive education should help them feel like they belong, and that who they are is not wrong. Who they are is not wrong. I mean, that's just activist language. So if someone's gay, for example, they need to be taught that who they are is not wrong, as though who they are is that they are gay. Right, I would disagree with that way of seeing people, and no one claims that who someone is wrong. Some people believe that some choices people make might be wrong. So again, it's just using activist skewed language in a government document. Again, it talks about education being age and stage appropriate. Great, who can disagree with that? but it's just what the government means by age and stage appropriate is not what I mean by age and stage appropriate. And this LGBT inclusive education, where should it take place? It should take place in including, but not exclusively, through expressive arts, languages, literacy, health and well-being, numeracy, religious and moral education, sciences and social studies. What was missed out there? No, I can't think of anything either. So in other words, as we've always said, in every subject, and also at every level from nursery upwards, there is to be LGBT content, just total indoctrination. And you can't withdraw your children from that, obviously. You can't say, I don't want them to do expressive arts, languages, literacy, health and well-being, numeracy, religious and moral education, science and social studies, because it's going to have LGBT indoctrination in it. You just got to withdraw them from the school. That's the only way to avoid it. It also talks about confidentiality, and basically says if a pupil announces they're gay or lesbian, bisexual or transgender, then that should be kept a secret from the parents if that's what the pupil wants. A couple more points at once. It says evidence demonstrates young gay and bisexual men in Scotland are at higher risk of HIV as a consequence of. Why are they at a higher risk of HIV? As a consequence of engaging in dangerous sexual practices? No, that's not what they say. It's as a consequence of having poor knowledge about HIV transmission. They will not say, they will not criticise unorthodox sexual practices that are plainly and demonstrably dangerous in different ways. They will not criticise them, because I guess that would be homophobic or heteronormative or something. So it's just ignorance that's the problem. It says 1 in 4 LGBT people will experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. Data has also indicated that transgender people have a high risk of experiencing abuse within relationships. Now again, the fact that LGBT relationships tend to have a higher level of dysfunction within them, I would argue that that is because an inherent factor of LGBT relationships, because these are a type of relationships that are not ideal, but obviously that perspective wouldn't get a look in from the Scottish Government's programme. There are different family forms. We know this already. Children have to be taught that any and every family form, 1 mum, 2 mums, 3 mums, 2 mums, 2 dads, or whatever, they're all equally valid. Again, which is a message that contradicts the core teaching of many religions. So you see how the Scottish Government's trying to have its cake and eat it. Saying we're going to include all perspectives. And if you've got values from your religion, we want to bring those into and include those perspectives in the teaching. But by the way, you better all learn that any family form is equally valid. It just doesn't make sense, but that's what they're trying to do. Right, we're almost there. What have we got? Right, how about this one? Children and young people who receive learning and teaching about these issues, sex education in general, are more likely to delay the onset of sexual activity. Right, well, I think that's not true. Professor David Payton's research in this area shows that's not true. Some low quality research seems to indicate that. Look at the high quality research and the evidence just isn't there. Not that bothers the Scottish Government though. And it says people who had this teaching experience positive outcomes such as safer, enjoyable, fulfilling and respectful sex when they do enter into sexual relationships. Let's just remember the beginning of this sentence, shall we? Children and young people. So children and young people will experience basically better sex when they enter into sexual relationships. Okay, well, we're talking about children here. That doesn't sound good to me. How about committed relationships, stable relationships? Those factors don't come into it. It's just as long as they enjoy having sex, that's mission accomplished. That is not mission accomplished. A young person might have a great time having sex, think it's absolutely wonderful, but what they're absolutely doing is messing up their relational capacity for the future, and it might end up with them having dysfunctional, unstable relationships in the future, could have dire consequences for themselves and other people and maybe their children in years to come. And the last thing of this, when they do enter into sexual relationships, whether in person or online, excuse me, I mean, what's that about? What is an online sexual relationship? So in other words, this can be a safer, enjoyable, fulfilling, respectful sexual relationship online. Well, a bit more explanation needed for there, I think, Scottish Government. Right, so we've had a look at the document there. So the document is full of sort of benign, banal, bland platitudes. They don't really mean anything. So what we really need to have to do is look at what happens in practice. And again, we look at the Scottish Government's official sex education resources, and that tells us, shows us what they really want presenting in schools. And inspectors will interpret this in the way that the Scottish Government wants them to, which is reflected in their sex education resources, and that will be pressured onto all schools. This remains very much a live issue. In Scotland, more and more parents are expressing concern. More and more parents have decided to home educate or go to specific schools, Muslim schools, and there's Christian schools opening around Scotland as well. This issue needs bringing up in the Parliament, but it won't be, because the Conservatives fail. Now, they're the party that should be doing it, but they just don't. For example, LGBT inclusive education, the Conservatives are right behind it. Not a single MSP opposed it when it was introduced. So the corrupting of children and young people in Scotland by the government will continue, and they will continue to present messages which are the wrong message, presented in the wrong way at the wrong age, and nothing's going to change about that. So this guidance is deliberately vague. If they were being honest, they would put in what they really mean, by which they would say, from age 5 we want the children inducting into LGBT activism. 3-year-olds in nursery, they need to learn that they can choose if they're a boy or a girl. 9-year-olds in secondary school, they need to be presented with a sort of full frontal close-up of female genitalia and label the different parts of it. 9 to 12-year-olds in primary school, they need to be taught in detail how to have sex and what it feels like. That's what should be in this guidance, because that's the important thing, isn't it? You want to know, what are they actually teaching? What are these sound values, etc., that are underpinning it? But they deliberately leave it all vague. So if we're going to protect children, the fight goes on against corrupting sex education in Scottish schools. So I think this guidance is a smokescreen, really. So when anyone complains about it, they can say, here's the guidance, this is what we say. There's nothing wrong with that, is there? I mean, do you not want age-appropriate, objective sex education based on sound values? Do you disagree with us about that? You see, this is all we want. It's a smokescreen. It's a smokescreen. But the small positive in this is that those passages they've included about religious belief and including it and tolerating it and valuing it and freedom of expression, there's ammunition there. There's ammunition there to be used in discussions anyone might have on this topic in the future. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope that was helpful, and see you soon. Goodbye.